Have you ever wondered if there's something you'd sacrifice absolutely everything for, even the person you love most in the world? Most of us will never face this impossible choice, but one man from ancient history did exactly that, and his decision still shocks and divides opinions to this day. I'm talking about Jephthah, an Israelite leader who made a promise that would change his life forever, but not in the way you'd expect. Here's an uncomfortable truth no one wants to admit. We live in a time where our word means very little. We promise diets that we give up on by the second week, swear eternal love that lasts until the first serious argument, and make career vows we break as soon as a better opportunity comes along. But what if I told you there's a story of a man who kept his promise, even when it cost him the life of his own daughter? Would you call that unwavering faith or extreme madness? Jephthah's story will force you to confront a tough question. How far would you go to keep your integrity? Because this man, rejected by his own family, humiliated by his background, and forced to live among the marginalized, discovered something that most people never understand. That your word is all you really have when everything else is taken away from you. And when God answered his desperate prayer in a way he could never have imagined, Jephthah found himself faced with the most cruel choice a father could ever make. Get ready for a journey that goes far beyond just a Bible story. You're about to discover how one man turned rejection into leadership, how a military battle became a personal tragedy, and why the most controversial decision in ancient history still teaches us profound lessons about character, faith, and the true cost of integrity. The answer will surprise you and might even disturb you more than you think. Imagine being born already carrying the weight of a rejection you never chose. Jephthah lived this reality from his first breath. The son of a prostitute, he grew up knowing that his origins were a source of shame for those who should have loved him. The society of his time didn't forgive that kind of family stain, and he felt it every single day. It was like carrying an invisible sign on his chest that said, "Unwanted," while watching his legitimate brothers receive all the love and recognition. This birthmark wouldn't just shape his childhood, it would also shape the character he would develop in the years that followed. The family rejection wasn't subtle. It was brutal and final. His own brothers, who shared the same father, kicked him out of the house without any mercy. "You won't inherit anything from our father," they said, as if Jephthah was just a mistake to be corrected. Think about the pain this represents, being rejected by the very people who should be your support system. It's like your own family telling you your existence is a mistake. This traumatic experience could have destroyed anyone else, but in Jephthah, it planted a different seed. The social stigma Jephthah carried was too heavy for any young person to bear. In ancient Hebrew culture, lineage determined practically everything: your worth, your opportunities, your future. Being the son of a prostitute meant you were automatically excluded from circles of power and respectability. It was like trying to climb a mountain with a stone tied to your foot, technically possible, but infinitely harder. Jephthah knew that no matter what he did, there would always be someone whispering about his origins. That painful awareness followed him like a shadow that never disappeared. But here's what few understand about rejection. It can either destroy you or forge you. Jephthah chose not to let the shame they tried to impose on him define him completely. Sure, the pain was there, throbbing and constant, but he discovered something powerful within himself. It's like when you learn to turn stones into stepping stones. Each humiliation became fuel to prove them wrong about his worth. This "I'll show them" mentality began to take root in his young mind, laying the groundwork for something extraordinary. The mark of family rejection left deep scars that would never fully heal. Jephthah would carry this wound for the rest of his life, like a constant reminder that the unconditional love he should have received at home simply didn't exist. It's like someone growing up never hearing "I love you" from their parents. That absence echoes forever. This emotional deprivation shapes the way you see the world and relate to others. For Jephthah, it meant he would have to find his own path to build identity and purpose, without the family foundation most people take for granted. The weight of social shame was suffocating, but it also revealed the special tempering of this man. While many would hide or seek ways to deny their origins, Jephthah developed an impressive resilience. It's like iron being forged in fire. The extreme heat doesn't destroy it. It strengthens it. Every look of disdain, every cruel comment, Every door slammed shut because of his origin. All of this was secretly preparing a leader to emerge from the ashes of rejection. The irony of life sometimes is surprising. Those who despised Jephthah the most still didn't know that one day they would desperately need him. Growing up as the son of a prostitute taught Jephthah lessons that legitimate sons would never learn. He developed a natural empathy for the marginalized, a deep understanding of the pain of exclusion, and a fierce determination never to let anyone make him feel inferior again. Think about the great leaders in history. Many of them emerged from adverse circumstances that forced them to develop emotional and mental muscles that comfort and ease could never provide. Jephthah was being shaped by his circumstances for something much bigger than his family could see at that moment. The rejected young man had no idea that his story of pain would become the prologue to an epic narrative of redemption and leadership. Every tear shed in silence, every night spent questioning his worth, every moment of forced solitude, all of this was preparing the ground for an exceptional warrior to emerge. The family rejection that seemed like his end was actually fueling a new beginning that would surprise everyone. And so, with a broken heart but not defeated, Jephthah prepared to leave behind the house that was never truly his, heading towards a destiny he couldn't even imagine. Fleeing to Tob wasn't just a change of address for Jephthah, it was the beginning of an extraordinary transformation that few could understand. Tob was a barren region, located east of the Jordan River, a kind of no-man's land that served as a refuge for exiles, refugees, and all those who didn't have a place in established communities. It was like a neutral ground where society's rejects gathered to rebuild their lives, away from judgment and prejudice. When you're kicked out of your home, you have two options: hide in shame or create something new and powerful. Jephthah chose the second option masterfully. Jephthah's genius was in his ability to see potential where others saw only human trash. He gathered around him men who, like him, had been discarded by society: repentant thieves, disillusioned soldiers, young people with no prospects, all united by the pain of rejection. It's like a conductor who manages to create a symphony with broken instruments. The music that emerges is even more powerful because it was built despite the limitations. Jephthah didn't offer these men empty promises. He offered something far more valuable: purpose and the chance to rewrite their stories. This ability to turn hopelessness into hope is the hallmark of great leaders. What happened in Tob was a true school of practical leadership that no university could offer. Jephthah learned to lead not through theories, but by facing real situations with real people who had real problems. Imagine trying to organize a group of men who had lost faith in humanity. That requires a type of leadership that goes beyond commands and hierarchies. He had to develop skills of a psychologist, strategist, mentor, and even a father to some of these lost men. Every conflict resolved, every successful mission, every moment of group unity strengthened not only the army that was forming, but also the leader Jephthah was becoming. The transformation of the misfits into competent warriors was a leadership miracle that deserves to be studied to this day. Jephthah didn't try to change these people. He channeled their unique traits into a greater purpose. A former thief became an expert in reconnaissance. An impulsive young man turned into an elite warrior. A bitter man found redemption protecting the weak. It's like what the best football coaches do. They don't try to turn all the players into the same type of athlete, but they find the best in each one and make it work as a cohesive unit. Jephthah was creating something his own brothers, with all their privileges, could never have: a true brotherhood based on mutual overcoming. The army that emerged from Tob wasn't just a group of mercenaries, it was a chosen family, united by bonds stronger than blood. Jephthah had accomplished something that few leaders ever do. He turned shared pain into collective strength. Every man there wasn't fighting just for money or glory. They were fighting for belonging, for dignity, for a second chance the world had denied them. Think about the power that represents. When people who have lost everything find something worth living for, they become virtually unbeatable. This was the foundation of the power Jephthah built, not through manipulation or fear, but through genuine hope and shared purpose. Jephthah's reputation and his armies began to spread far beyond the borders of Tob. Stories of their victories, their justice, and their ability to turn losers into winners reach the ears of important people. It's ironic how life works sometimes. Those who rejected him for being unworthy now whispered his name with a mix of admiration and envy. Jephthah wasn't just building an army anymore. He was building a legacy that proves it's possible to completely reinvent yourself, no matter where you started. Each victory was a silent but powerful response to everyone who said he would never be anything. The leadership Jephthah developed in Tob was fundamentally different from the traditional leadership of his time. While other leaders commanded through lineage or wealth, he led through example and personal transformation. His men followed him not because they were forced to, but because they saw in him someone who genuinely cared about each of their futures. It's like the difference between a boss who orders around and a leader who inspires. The first gets obedience, the second gets devotion. Jephthah had discovered that true leadership doesn't come from top to bottom, but from the inside out, and this discovery would not only change his life, but the fate of an entire nation. The time was approaching when this leadership forged in adversity would be tested on a much larger scale. Jephthah had turned outcasts into warriors, but soon he would discover that his own origins, the very ones that caused his expulsion, would be exactly what Israel needed for its salvation. The irony was about to reveal itself spectacularly. Those who had despised him would come crawling back not out of mercy, but because they desperately needed the courage and leadership that only someone forged in pain could offer. The rejected boy was about to become the last hope of a people in despair. The threat from the Ammonites was no joke. It was a matter of life or death for Israel. These warriors came with a thirst for blood and conquest, advancing over the Israelite cities like an unstoppable avalanche. The news reached the elders of Gilead like successive blows. Another city taken, more families enslaved, more land lost to the enemy. It was the kind of crisis that exposes a person's true nature. Some hide, others flee, but few face reality head-on. The elders of Gilead were desperate, and desperation has a curious way of making people rethink their old certainties and deeply held prejudices. The irony of the situation was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The same men who had supported Jephthah's expulsion, who considered his origin an unacceptable stain on the family, now found themselves forced to seek him out. Imagine the scene. Respectable elders, with their white beards and fine clothes, walking down the dusty road to Tob, swallowing their pride with every step. It was like watching people who had always despised a doctor being forced to beg for his help when death is knocking at the door. Life has these cruel ironies. Sometimes our salvation comes from those we've rejected the most. When the elders finally reached Jephthah, the meeting must have been tense, like a violin string ready to snap. They needed him, but they still carried all the prejudice and discomfort of having to ask for help from the son of a prostitute. Jephthah, on the other hand, was no longer the insecure young man who had been cast out. He was now an experienced leader, forged in adversity and tested in real battles. It's like when a former fired employee becomes the CEO of a rival company, and the old bosses have to negotiate with him. The power dynamic had completely shifted, and everyone involved knew it very well. The proposal from the elders was simple and desperate. Be our commander and help us fight the Ammonites. But Jephthah wasn't naive. He had learned in life that nothing comes for free, especially when it comes from people who've hurt you before. It's like an experienced businessman evaluating a business proposal. He knew he needed to set the terms clearly before agreeing to anything. The past rejection had taught him to value his position and not settle for scraps when he could have the whole feast. This was his chance, not just to help Israel, but to completely rewrite his personal story. The terms Jephthah set were brilliant in their simplicity. He wouldn't just be a temporary commander, he would become the permanent leader of Gilead after the victory. It was a masterstroke, turning a rescue mission into an opportunity for lasting leadership. Think about the strategy behind it. Jephthah was essentially saying, "You rejected me when I had nothing to offer. Now that you need me, the price is total recognition." It's like an investor buying stock in a struggling company. He takes the risk, but demands control. Jephthah had learned that generosity without guarantees is a recipe for being used and discarded again. The elders' acceptance of the terms revealed just how desperate the situation really was. They were willing to give Jephthah exactly what they had refused to recognize by birthright: leadership and honor. It's fascinating how crises make social hierarchies collapse like houses of cards. Suddenly, the pure lineage of the elders meant less than the proven competence of the rejected bastard. This reversal of values wasn't just symbolic, it was a public acknowledgement that they had made a terrible mistake by judging Jephthah solely on his origins. Desperation had become the great equalizer. The agreement made at that moment wasn't just military, it was deeply personal and emotional. Jephthah wasn't just agreeing to lead an army, he was claiming his place in his people's history. It's like an adopted child who grows up, becomes successful, and finally gets the recognition from the family that once rejected him. Every word of the agreement was a small victory over years of humiliation and exclusion. Jephthah knew he was about to risk everything: his life, his reputation, his loyal army. But he also knew this was his golden opportunity to turn rejection into complete redemption. The walk back to organize the military campaign carried immense symbolic weight. Jephthah wasn't just preparing for a battle against the Ammonites, he was preparing for the moment that would define not only his fate, but his identity for all eternity. The pressure was immense. Failure would not only mean the destruction of Israel, but also the confirmation of every prejudice he had ever faced. However, something inside him knew this was exactly the moment his entire life of suffering and preparation had been building toward. The stage was set for a spectacular demonstration that a person's worth is not measured by their origins, but by their courage in the face of the impossible. The eve of the battle against the Ammonites was as heavy as a storm about to break. Jephthah knew he wasn't just facing powerful enemies, but the moment that would determine if his entire journey of rejection and overcoming would be worth it. It's in times like these that a person's faith is truly tested, when the odds are against you, and all that's left is to trust in something greater than your own strength. Jephthah had built a formidable army and developed brilliant strategies, but he still felt he needed something more, a divine guarantee that justice would finally prevail. It was in this moment of vulnerability and longing for certainty that one of the most controversial promises in ancient history was made. The vow Jephthah made to God was solemn and irreversible. "If you give me victory over the Ammonites, I will sacrifice the first person who comes out of my house to greet me when I return victorious." In Jephthah's mind, this seemed logical and safe. Surely it would be a servant, perhaps a soldier, someone whose life could be offered as a token of gratitude for the victory. It's like when we make a bet that seems impossible to lose, confident that we control all the variables. Jephthah had grown up in a culture where vows to God were sacred and unbreakable, where a promise made to the Almighty was more binding than any human contract. He wasn't being reckless. He was desperately sincere in his search for divine assurance. The psychology behind this vow reveals a lot about human nature when faced with the impossible. Jephthah had spent his entire life fighting against unfavorable odds, always having to prove his worth twice as much as anyone normal. Now facing the most important battle of his life, he wanted to eliminate any possibility of failure. It's like a businessman about to make the deal of a lifetime, offering everything he has as collateral, not out of irresponsibility, but out of total commitment to success. Jephthah was putting his faith into action in the most radical way possible, turning hope into absolute commitment. What makes this vow even more complex is understanding the cultural context of the time. Human sacrifices weren't completely foreign in the surrounding cultures, although they were prohibited among the Israelites. Jephthah may have been influenced by practices he had observed during his years in Tob, blending his Israelite faith with concepts from other traditions. It's like someone raised between different cultures, developing a hybrid worldview, not always orthodox, but deeply sincere. Jephthah wasn't trying to manipulate God or put on a religious show. He was offering what he considered his most precious possession in exchange for the victory that would save his people. It was an extreme demonstration of faith, even if questionable in its methods. The cruel irony of fate was already preparing behind the scenes of this seemingly safe promise. Jephthah had carefully calculated who might come out of his house first, but life has a peculiar way of subverting our most basic expectations. It's like meticulously planning a trip, only to find that the only available flight is full. Sometimes, our most logical predictions simply don't align with reality. The vow that seemed like an insurance policy was about to turn into a personal tragedy of unimaginable proportions. Jephthah didn't know it, but he had just planted the seed for his greatest victory and his greatest pain simultaneously. The psychological weight of this commitment must have followed Jephthah throughout the preparation for the battle. Every planned strategy, every speech to his soldiers, every private prayer now carried the additional burden of an irrevocable promise. It's like signing a contract without reading the fine print. You know you've committed to something important, but you don't have full clarity on the implications. Jephthah had turned the military battle into something much more personal, a matter of divine honor that demanded the complete fulfillment of his word, no matter the consequences. This additional pressure could have paralyzed an ordinary leader, but for Jephthah, it meant that failure simply wasn't an option. The sincerity of Jephthah's vow is evident in how he made it, not publicly, to impress others, but privately, as a personal agreement with God. It wasn't politics or religious marketing. It was genuine faith expressed in the most radical way he knew. It's like someone promising to take care of their elderly parents, not because others are watching, but because they genuinely believe it's the right thing to do. Jephthah had learned that in life, especially when you come from nothing, nothing comes for free. There's always a price to pay. He was willing to pay that price up front, trusting that God would honor such radical faith and absolute commitment. The vow was made, sealed in the heart of a man who had never learned to do things halfway. Jephthah didn't know that he was about to discover that some victories cost more than we could ever imagine paying, and that the gods, or God, sometimes answer our prayers in ways that test not only our faith, but our ability to live with the consequences of our own sincerity. The battle against the Ammonites was about to begin, but the true war, between promise and love, between honor and heart, hadn't even been declared yet. The stage was set for one of the most painful lessons about the power and danger of our own words. The battle against the Ammonites was a masterful display of everything Jephthah had learned during his years of exile and leadership. His military strategies, forged through hands-on experience with his army of outcasts, proved to be superior to the conventional tactics of his enemies. It's like watching a master chess player who grew up playing in the streets face off against opponents who only learned in formal schools. Creativity born out of necessity always beats the rigidity of textbooks. Jephthah coordinated his men with a precision that even impressed the traditional Israeli soldiers, showing that true leadership doesn't come from titles, but from proven competence in the field. Every strategic move was a validation of years of preparation and a definitive response to all who doubted his worth. The victory was overwhelming and complete, far beyond what anyone had dared to expect. The Ammonites, who had seemed invincible in their advance, were not only defeated but completely demoralized and scattered. It's like those rare moments in sports when an underdog team not only wins but completely dominates the favored opponent. The victory transcends the result and becomes a statement of principles. Jephthah had freed not only the occupied cities, but also restored dignity and hope to the entire people of Israel. Each reclaimed territory was tangible proof that his promise to the elders had not been in vain, and that his faith in God had been answered spectacularly. The people of Israel exploded in celebration like nothing seen in generations. In the streets of the liberated cities, men, women, and children sang victory songs and danced with a joy that came from deep within their souls. It was the kind of celebration that happens when an entire people is saved from slavery and death. Not a superficial celebration, but a genuine outburst of gratitude and relief. Jephthah instantly became a national hero, the savior who had emerged from the shadows to rescue Israel in its darkest hour. It's like when an unknown firefighter saves an entire family from a fire and suddenly becomes the symbol of all that is good in humanity. The son of a prostitute who had been rejected was now hailed as the liberator sent by God. But even at the height of the celebration, the weight of the vow began to press down on Jephthah's heart like a stone in his chest. Every cheer, every word of gratitude, every look of admiration carried with it the painful reminder of the promise he had made. It's like winning the lottery and remembering you promised to donate half of the prize to charity, The joy and obligation mix in a complex and uncomfortable way. Jephthah knew that his victory had come at a cost, something still left to be paid, and that awareness started to tint his joy with shades of apprehension. The public euphoria contrasted dramatically with the growing tension inside him, creating an emotional dissonance that only he could truly feel. The journey home after the victory must have been the longest and most psychologically heavy of Jephthah's life. Every kilometer brought him closer to the moment of fulfilling his vow, and he probably spent hours mentally rehearsing what the meeting would be like. In his mind, he was still convinced that it would be a servant who would come out first to greet him, maybe the butler of the house, or a soldier assigned to welcome the victorious commander. It's like an executive coming back from a successful business trip, mentally anticipating how they will be received at the office. Jephthah had brilliantly fulfilled his part of the bargain with God. Now it was time to honor his word just as impeccably. The public recognition of his leadership and military competence had finally erased the scars of familial rejection, but it had created new pressure, the expectation of moral and spiritual perfection. Jephthah was no longer just a military commander. He had become a symbol of faith and determination for all of Israel. It's like an athlete breaking a world record. Suddenly, all eyes are on you, and any failure is magnified. Jephthah felt the weight of this responsibility, knowing that his integrity was being tested, not just before God, but before an entire nation that now saw him as a role model. The military victory had only been the first act of a much larger drama unfolding. The ultimate irony of the situation was about to be revealed in a brutal way. Jephthah had spent his entire life fighting to be accepted and recognized, and now that he had finally gained as much respect and power as he could, he would discover that some achievements come with prices we never imagined having to pay. It's like climbing a mountain for years, being completely focused on the summit, only to realize the terrifying view when you finally get there. The victory over the Ammonites had been complete and glorious, but Jephthah's true test of character was just beginning. Every step toward home brought him closer to the moment that would define not just his legacy as a warrior, but his identity as a man of his word, regardless of the personal consequences it might bring. The national hero was about to discover that some victories are simultaneously our greatest triumphs and our deepest tragedies, and that the true measure of a man isn't just in his ability to win battles, but in his willingness to honor his promises, even when they cost more than he ever imagined possible. The sound of drums and joyful chants echoing down the road should have filled Jephthah's heart with pure happiness, but something inside him froze when he recognized the voice leading the celebration. It was her, his only daughter, his beloved girl, running to meet her heroic father with all the innocence and joy that only a young person can express. It's like those movie moments when everything seems perfect on the surface, but the viewer knows that an epic tragedy is about to unfold. Jephthah must have felt the world stop for a few seconds, the sound distorting, reality fragmenting before his eyes. The person he loved most in the world was coming toward him, dancing with joy, unaware that she was exactly the person his promise had condemned. The scene was simultaneously the most beautiful and the cruelest anyone could imagine. His daughter had organized a reception worthy of a national hero. Music, dances, flowers, the whole community celebrating the return of Israel's liberator. It's like those surprise birthday parties that are organized with so much love and care, but break our hearts when we realize something terrible is about to ruin everything. She was radiant, proud, probably had spent days planning this special reception for the father she admired above all. Jephthah saw in her all the purity and hope he had fought to protect, and at the same time, he understood that his own promise had become the greatest threat to the happiness of the person he loved most. The psychological impact of this moment must have been devastating for Jephthah, like being struck by lightning on a sunny day. All the mental strategies he had built, all the rational justifications about it will probably be a servant, crumbled instantly. It's like an architect discovering that the building he designed with such care is being built exactly on a geological fault. Everything that seemed solid and safe suddenly becomes dangerous and unstable. In that instant, Jephthah realized he had completely underestimated the implications of his promise, and that his sincere faith had turned into a terrible trap, ensnaring exactly the one he most wanted to protect. Jephthah's immediate reaction was total despair. He tore his clothes and cried out in anguish, "Ah, my daughter, you have brought me great shame." This wasn't the reaction of a cold or calculating man, but of a father who had just realized that his own integrity had become the greatest threat to his daughter's life. It's like a doctor discovering that the medicine he prescribed with the best intentions is causing a fatal allergic reaction in his own child. Jephthah was being torn between two fundamental values of his identity: being a man of his word before God and being a protective father to his only daughter. This tension created an existential crisis that would test all the principles by which he had lived. What makes this situation even more tragic is realizing that Jephthah's daughter wasn't just his heir, but probably his only true family after years of rejection and exile. She represented not only his biological future, but his deepest emotional connection and his reason for living. It's like a shipwreck survivor carefully guarding their last reserve of drinking water, only to discover they must use it to extinguish a fire that threatens to destroy their shelter. Jephthah was being forced to choose between his spiritual integrity and his paternal love, a choice no father should ever have to make. The irony was too cruel. The military success that should have crowned his life was turning into the catalyst for his greatest personal loss. The psychological dynamic of this moment revealed deep aspects of Jephthah's personality that perhaps even he hadn't fully known. His reaction wasn't to try to find legal loopholes or alternative interpretations of his vow. It was that of a man who knew he had given his word and that he would have to honor it, no matter the personal cost. It's like a businessman discovering that honoring a contract will mean bankruptcy, but deciding to follow through anyway, because his reputation is worth more than his wealth. Jephthah was showing that his transformation from being rejected to becoming a leader had been genuine and complete. He was no longer someone who could use tricks to escape uncomfortable responsibilities. The encounter with his daughter marked the moment when Jephthah discovered that some victories come at the exact cost of what we value most. He had asked God for a guarantee of success and received exactly that. But the price was being paid in the most costly currency possible. It's like winning every lottery number and then discovering that the winning ticket belonged to your child. The celebration around him continued. People were still singing his victory. But for Jephthah, the world had changed forever in that exact moment when he saw his daughter's joyful face running toward him. From that moment on, every breath would be a struggle between love and honor, between heart and principles, between being a father and being a man of his word. The national hero who had saved Israel was about to discover that true heroism sometimes demands sacrifices that go far beyond what any battlefield could ever require. Jephthah's daughter's response to learning of her fate was something that challenges our modern understanding of how one should react to such terrible news. Instead of despair, screams, or attempts to escape, she showed a serenity that revealed an extraordinary spiritual maturity for her age. "My father," she said, "if you made a vow to the Lord, do with me as you have said." It's like witnessing someone receive a terminal diagnosis and responding with gratitude for having lived a life full of meaning. Such a noble reaction that makes us question our own ability to face adversity with dignity. Her acceptance wasn't passive resignation, but an active choice to honor both her father's integrity and her own faith in a higher purpose. What stands out most in her reaction is the complete absence of bitterness or rebellion against the situation. She immediately understood that her father was being torn apart by this revelation and chose not to make his suffering any worse with recriminations or desperate tears. It's like those rare people who, even when facing terrible injustices, maintain their compassion for those who caused them, not out of weakness, but from an inner strength that transcends the natural instinct for self-preservation. Jephthah's daughter showed that she had inherited from her father not only his blood, but also the capacity to place principles above personal comfort, even when it meant the ultimate sacrifice. Her only request was for 2 months to go to the mountains and weep for my virginity, I and my companions. This request reveals deep layers of meaning that go far beyond the obvious. She wasn't just mourning the fact that she wouldn't have the chance to marry and have children. She was mourning all the unrealized dreams, all the life possibilities that would never come to pass. It's like a young artist discovering they have a degenerative disease, and asking for one last month to paint their masterpieces. It's not just about the art, but about leaving a legacy of beauty in the world. She wanted time to process, to properly say goodbye to the life she had dreamed of living, and to find a way to turn her personal tragedy into something of lasting significance. The emotional maturity she demonstrated in that moment is almost supernatural. While her father was destroyed by guilt and internal conflict, she became the stabilizing force that allowed both of them to face the situation with dignity. It's like those situations where a sick child becomes the comfort for their adult parents, demonstrating wisdom that seems to come from a much deeper source than life experience. She intuitively understood that her reaction would determine how this tragedy would be remembered, as a demonstration of extraordinary faith or as a senseless tragedy. Her choice to accept with grace turned what could have been just a story of suffering into a powerful testimony of courage and purpose. During those 2 months in the mountains, she and her friends created something that transcended personal lament. They established a ritual of remembrance that would last for generations. It wasn't just about mourning what was lost, but about celebrating what had been lived and honoring the meaning behind the sacrifice. It's like when entire communities gather to honor fallen soldiers, the focus isn't just on the loss, but on the value of what was defended. She transformed her final months of life into a preparation ceremony that would give the women of Israel a tradition to remember that some things are more important than our own preservation, and that true faith sometimes requires sacrifices that challenge our human understanding. The way she faced those 2 months also reveals a deep understanding of the value of the female community. She didn't face her fate alone. She surrounded herself with other young women who could share her tears, her prayers, and her reflections on the meaning of life and faith. It's like those support groups where people facing similar situations find strength in shared experience, not to change what cannot be changed, but to find meaning and purpose in the midst of pain. These friends became witnesses to her courage and guardians of her memory, ensuring that her story would be told not as a senseless tragedy, but as an example of faith that would inspire other women for centuries. The period of preparation she requested also demonstrated practical wisdom about the importance of emotional processing. She knew that both she and her father needed time to reach a place of inner peace before the promise was fulfilled. It's like someone receiving devastating news and asking for time to put things in order, not to escape reality, but to face it in an organized and meaningful way. She was essentially creating space for the tragedy to transform into something that would honor both her father's integrity and her own faith, ensuring that the sacrifice would have the greatest meaning possible. When she finally returned from the mountains, she had transformed from a joyful young girl into a woman of deep faith, ready to fulfill a destiny that, although tragic, she had chosen to embrace as part of a greater purpose. Her journey of acceptance not only paved the way for the fulfillment of her father's vow, but also established a standard of courage and faith that would echo through history, showing that sometimes our greatest contribution to the world comes not from what we achieve, but from how we face what we cannot control. The fulfillment of Jephthah's vow is shrouded in a veil of mystery that the scriptures deliberately maintain. There are no graphic descriptions, no bloody details, only the solemn declaration that he fulfilled the vow he had made. This narrative silence is more powerful than any detailed description could be, forcing our imagination to fill in the gaps with the emotional weight of a father doing the unthinkable. It's like a movie that cuts to the scene at its most dramatic moment, leaving our minds to process the magnitude of what just happened. The biblical text doesn't allow us to be voyeurs of this tragedy. Instead, it invites us to meditate on the deep implications of a man who chose spiritual integrity above all he loved in life. The absence of details about the sacrifice itself forces us to focus on what truly matters, the character of a man tested to his most extreme limits. Jephthah didn't seek escape routes, didn't consult other religious leaders for alternative interpretations, didn't try to negotiate with God for a more palatable solution. It's like watching someone fulfill a terrible promise, even knowing that it will destroy their own happiness. There's something both admirable and disturbing in this absolute determination. Jephthah had learned throughout his life of rejection and overcoming that a man's word is all he really possesses, and that breaking his word would mean losing his own identity. For him, becoming someone who doesn't keep promises would be worse than facing any external consequence. The silence of the scriptures also protects the dignity of both the father and the daughter in this most intimate and painful moment. Some human experiences are too sacred to be exposed in detail. They belong to the realm of the private, the indescribable, what can only be understood by those who have lived something similar. It's like those final moments of farewell between people who love each other deeply. The most important words are whispered. The most significant gestures happen away from prying eyes. The text allows us to imagine the final conversations between father and daughter, the silent tears, the desperate prayers, but it keeps the sanctity of these moments protected from our morbid curiosity. The way Jephthah faced this moment reveals layers of his personality that perhaps even he didn't fully know until then. He discovered that he was capable of a kind of suffering that transcends physical pain. The agony of willingly doing something that every fiber of his being as a father rejected. It's like a surgeon having to operate on his own child in a life or death situation. Technically possible, but emotionally devastating beyond comprehension. Jephthah was operating at a level of principle so high that he had separated himself from his most basic paternal instincts of protection. This ability to transcend even paternal love in the name of a greater conviction places him in a unique category among historical leaders. The psychological impact of this act on Jephthah must have been catastrophic and permanent. He had saved Israel, gained respect and power, fulfilled all expectations of leadership, but the personal price had been the loss of the only thing that truly mattered to him. It's like a firefighter saving an entire building, but losing his own family in the process. The public victory becomes eternally tinged by the private loss. Jephthah discovered that some achievements cost exactly what makes the achievement meaningful. He would be remembered as the liberator of Israel, but would forever carry the mark of a man who sacrificed his own heart on the altar of his principles. The absence of details also forces us to confront our own questions about faith, sacrifice, and integrity. What would we do in a similar situation? How far would our integrity take us if the price was the very thing we love most? It's easy to admire courage when the cost is bearable, but Jephthah was operating in a territory where courage becomes almost indistinguishable from tragedy. His story doesn't offer us comfortable answers or simple moral lessons. It presents us with a dilemma that challenges our understanding of what it means to be a person of principle. Some commentators argue that he should have broken the vow. Others defend that his integrity demanded exactly what he did. The legacy of this sacrifice extended far beyond the act itself, creating ripples of meaning that would affect future generations. Jephthah had shown that there are things more important than our own happiness, more sacred than our own desires, more enduring than our own life. It's like planting a tree, knowing that you'll never sit in its shade. The act transcends personal benefit and becomes a gift for the future. The silence of the scriptures about the details preserves the focus on what truly matters. A man discovered that his word was worth more than his happiness, and he chose to honor it regardless of the consequences. This choice would echo through history not as an example to be necessarily imitated, but as a demonstration of the extremes to which human character can go. The sacrifice had been made, but its true importance would be measured not by the bloody details of how it was done, but by the lasting impact it would have on all who would hear this story in the generations to come, forcing each person to confront their own convictions about integrity, faith, and the price we are willing to pay for what we truly believe. What happened after the sacrifice of Jephthah's daughter was extraordinary, transcending personal tragedy and transforming into a lasting cultural movement. The women of Israel, especially the young ones, established an annual tradition of mourning and remembering the sacrifice of Jephthah's daughter for 4 days each year. It wasn't just a ritual of mourning, it was a ceremony of honor that would forever preserve the memory of a young woman who faced her fate with exceptional courage. It's similar to the memorials that communities create after tragedies that deeply mark their collective identity. Like 9/11 in the US or the Holocaust in Europe, events that become permanent markers of cultural consciousness. The Israelite women instinctively understood that this story couldn't be forgotten, that it carried lessons too important to be lost over time. The annual tradition created by the women of Israel revealed a deep understanding of the power of collective memory. They knew that untold stories become lost stories, and that the sacrifice of Jephthah's daughter contained layers of meaning that needed to be preserved for future generations. It's like when indigenous communities keep oral traditions alive through specific rituals. It's not just about remembering the past, but about drawing continuous wisdom from experiences that shaped the people's identity. These women became the guardians of a narrative that spoke about feminine courage, unwavering faith, and the moral complexity of sacred promises. They turned an individual tragedy into a cultural heritage that would teach lessons about character and conviction for centuries. What makes this tradition even more significant is that it was specifically initiated and maintained by the young women of Israel. They naturally identified with Jephthah's daughter, a young woman whose life was cut short before she could experience marriage, motherhood, and all the traditional milestones of feminine life at the time. It's similar to modern movements, where young people organize to honor victims of tragedies that could have been them. There's a visceral identification that transcends time and specific circumstances. These young Israelites saw in Jephthah's daughter not only a victim, but an example of how to face difficult destinies with dignity and purpose. Essentially, they were saying, if we ever face impossible choices, we want to have the courage she demonstrated. The specific way this memory was preserved, 4 annual days of mourning, created a sacred space in the Israelite calendar dedicated exclusively to reflection on sacrifice and integrity. It wasn't just a fleeting reminder, but a deliberately set-aside time to meditate on deep issues of faith and character. It's like those spiritual retreats or reflection periods that some people take annually, moments dedicated to examining fundamental values and reaffirming important commitments. During those 4 days, the women of Israel gathered not just to weep, but to discuss, reflect, and extract practical lessons from a story that challenged simple understandings of right and wrong. They were essentially creating an informal curriculum of moral education based on a real and profoundly impactful experience. The legacy of Jephthah's daughter, through this annual tradition, also set an important precedent for how to honor sacrifices we don't fully understand. The Israelite women didn't need to completely approve of Jephthah's decision to recognize the value of the courage shown by his daughter. It's similar to how we honor fallen soldiers, even when we question the wars they fought in. We can separate our admiration for individual courage from our evaluation of the broader circumstances. These women created a space to honor silent faith and gracious acceptance, without necessarily endorsing all the theological and ethical complexities of the situation. They focused on what was unequivocally admirable, the transformation of an ordinary young woman into an example of extraordinary courage. The preservation of memory through this female ritual also highlighted unique aspects of Jephthah's daughter's experience that might have been lost in narratives dominated by male perspectives. The women understood viscerally what it meant for a young woman to give up not just her life, but all the dreams and possibilities that define the female experience: marriage, children, building a family of her own. It's like when support groups are formed by people who've shared similar experiences. There are nuances of understanding that can only be fully grasped by those who have lived through something similar. These women created a space of memory that specifically honored the feminine dimension of sacrifice, ensuring that this perspective was not lost in the grandeur of the broader military and political narrative. The tradition established by the Israelite women also demonstrated how communities can transform individual tragedies into sources of collective strength. Instead of letting the story of Jephthah's daughter become just a sad footnote in the biography of a famous warrior, they elevated her to the status of cultural heroine in her own right. It's similar to what happens when communities turn sites of tragedy into memorials of inspiration. The focus shifts from loss to the lessons of resilience and character. These women were essentially saying to future generations, remember not only how she died, but how she lived her last months, and let that inspire you when you face your own moments of trial. They turned a story of an end into a story of lasting example. The annual ritual created a legacy that likely lasted far longer than Jephthah's military achievements, demonstrating that sometimes it's acts of memory and honor that have a greater historical impact than the events they commemorate. Jephthah's daughter had found a form of immortality through the dedicated remembrance of other women who recognized in her something worthy of eternal preservation, ensuring that her quiet courage echoed through the centuries as a testimony to the transformative power of faith, accepted with grace, even in the most impossible circumstances to understand or accept. The story of Jephthah teaches us an uncomfortable truth that our modern culture prefers to ignore. Our words have real consequences, and promises made in moments of desperation do not become less binding when we discover their true cost. We live in a time where contracts are broken, oaths are forgotten, and commitments are treated as flexible suggestions, but Jephthah confronts us with a completely different standard of integrity. It's like confronting someone who's still paying off debts from decades ago while you cancel credit cards to avoid responsibility. There's something both admirable and disturbing about this level of moral consistency. The fundamental lesson here isn't necessarily that we should make reckless vows, but that we should treat our promises with the absolute seriousness they deserve, carefully considering the implications before we speak. Jephthah's vow also teaches us about the danger of trying to negotiate with God or with absolute principles using our own limited logic. Jephthah thought he could control the variables of his promise, assuming he knew exactly who would be the first to come out of his house to greet him. It's like those people who make safe bets in the financial markets, confident they understand all the relevant factors, only to find out that reality is infinitely more complex and unpredictable than their calculations. The lesson here is profound. When we commit to something greater than ourselves, whether it's God or an absolute moral principle, we must be prepared to discover that we don't control the consequences as much as we thought. Jephthah teaches us the humility to recognize that our promises may lead us into territories we never expected to explore. One of the most powerful lessons from Jephthah's story is the difference between blind obedience and conscious obedience. Jephthah didn't fulfill his vow because he was a religious fanatic, incapable of critical thinking. He did it because he had developed a deep understanding that his identity was fundamentally tied to his word. It's like the difference between someone who follows rules because they fear punishment and someone who follows them because they recognize that they represent something greater than personal convenience. Jephthah had learned, through years of rejection and overcoming, that his integrity was literally all he possessed. Without it, all his achievements would be empty. This lesson resonates especially today, when it's easy to compromise principles for convenience, but hard to rebuild a reputation once trust is lost. The story also teaches us about the real weight of leadership and the responsibilities that come with positions of authority. Jephthah wasn't making a promise just as a private individual. He was representing all of Israel before God, and his words carried the weight of an entire nation. It's similar to how presidents or CEOs discover that their impulsive statements have consequences that affect millions of people. Leadership amplifies both the power and responsibility of our words. Jephthah teaches us that true leaders must be willing to personally pay the price for their decisions, even when that price becomes greater than they ever imagined. This is a lesson especially relevant in an era where many leaders make grand promises but rarely take personal responsibility for the consequences. Another crucial lesson is about the importance of considering the impact of our decisions on innocent people we love. Jephthah made a promise that seemed to affect only him, but he discovered that he had inadvertently placed his daughter in an impossible position. It's like when parents make career or financial choices thinking only about the immediate impact, without considering how that might affect their children years down the line. Jephthah's story teaches us that our decisions, especially the most important ones, rarely affect only ourselves. They create ripples that affect those closest to us, often in ways we can't predict. This awareness should make our promises more careful and our commitments more thoughtful. Jephthah's daughter's reaction teaches us something equally profound about how to face the consequences of decisions made by others that directly affect us. She could have rebelled, run away, or blamed her father, but she chose grace and acceptance. It's a lesson about how our response to circumstances we don't control can be more important than the circumstances themselves. Think about people facing hereditary diseases, accidents caused by others, or systemic injustices. They didn't choose their situations, but they can choose how to respond to them. Jephthah's daughter teaches us that it's possible to find purpose and dignity even in the most unjust situations, and that our response to adversity can become our most powerful legacy. The preservation of Jephthah's daughter's memory by the women of Israel teaches us about the importance of honoring sacrifices even when we don't fully understand them. These women created a tradition that lasted generations, not because they had all the answers about the ethical complexities of the situation, but because they recognized something valuable that deserved to be remembered. It's similar to how we honor fallen soldiers, even when we question the wars they fought in. We can separate our admiration for individual courage from our evaluation of the broader circumstances. This lesson teaches us that we can learn from examples of character even in contexts that make us uncomfortable, and that preserving these stories is essential for the moral development of future generations. Finally, the entire story of Jephthah teaches us that life rarely offers simple choices between right and wrong, but often confronts us with tensions between equally important values: love versus honor, family versus principle, heart versus word. Jephthah shows us that moral maturity isn't in avoiding these tensions, but in facing them with integrity, accepting that some decisions will cost us deeply regardless of what we choose, and that the true test of character comes not when choices are easy, but when they are impossible, forcing us to discover which values truly define who we are when everything else is taken from us. After hearing this entire story, one question starts pounding in your mind: what would you do in Jephthah's place? It's easy to judge his decisions when we're comfortably sitting, far from the heat of battle and the weight of impossible promises. But the reality is that we all at some point in life face smaller versions of that same choice, moments when our integrity costs more than we expected to pay. Maybe it's time for you to stop making promises you're not willing to fully keep. How many times have you said "I promise" without truly weighing the weight of those two words? Jephthah teaches us that our word should be our most valuable currency. Once spent, it's impossible to recover. What transformation would happen in your life if you treated every commitment as if your reputation depended on it? Because in truth, it does. Here's what I want you to do right now. Think of a promise you made and didn't keep. It could be to your spouse, your children, your parents, or even to yourself. Can that promise still be honored? If so, how about starting today? If not, how about having the courage to apologize and explain why you failed? Jephthah shows us that integrity isn't about being perfect. It's about being consistent with your values, even when it's costly. But let's go deeper. Do you have the courage to live like Jephthah's daughter? She taught us that sometimes we face situations we don't choose, but we can always choose how to react to them. How many times have you blamed others for your circumstances, instead of focusing on what you can control? Your attitude, your response, your choice to find purpose even in pain. The truth is, we live in a generation of people who quit at the first difficulty, who break promises when they become inconvenient, who choose the easy path instead of the right one. Jephthah and his daughter represent the complete opposite. They show us what happens when human beings decide that some principles are more important than personal comfort. So I ask you, are you ready to stop living a life of half commitments? Are you ready to become someone whose word truly means something? Are you willing to discover who you really are when tested to your limits? The story of Jephthah isn't just about an ancient warrior. It's a mirror reflecting our own integrity. And if you walked away from this story feeling uncomfortable, questioning your own convictions, then it has fulfilled its purpose. Because real transformation always begins with discomfort. If this story touched something deep within you, if it made you rethink what really matters in life, then subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We have many more stories like this that will challenge your way of thinking and inspire you to live with more purpose and integrity. Because the world needs more people willing to pay the price of character excellence, and you could be one of them.